All right, let's do this. The Charlie Chaplin cell phone. In 1928, a woman walks through the premiere of a Charlie Chaplin film at Grauman's Chinese Theater in Los Angeles. The footage is real, shot on 35mm film by a documentary crew. She is holding something to her ear and talking into it, and there were no mobile phones in 1928. Irish filmmaker George Clark discovered the clip in 2010 while reviewing behind-the-scenes footage from Chaplin's film, The Circus. He uploaded it to YouTube, and within weeks, it had received over 20 million views. The coverage followed fast, from the BBC to Fox News to Time magazine, all asking the same question. What is that object, and who is she talking to? The mainstream explanation is reasonable on its surface. Siemens and Western Electric both manufactured handheld hearing aids in the 1920s. The Western Electric Model 34A, produced around 1925, was boxy, handheld, and held near the ear. The shape is consistent with what appears in the footage. Historians point to this and consider the case closed, but the explanation has a hole you could drive a truck through. A hearing aid amplifies sound from the environment around you. It does not require you to speak back into it. The figure in the footage is not just holding the device to her ear. She is talking, her lips moving in what Clark documented as an apparent two-way exchange. When the film is slowed down, she appears to react to something she has heard, then respond. A hearing aid has no one on the other end. The footage has never been conclusively explained. The woman's identity has never been confirmed. The device has never been matched to any documented period technology that would require both speaking and listening simultaneously. Clark's original video is still online. The woman is still walking, still talking, still holding something that should not exist for another 80 years. If it is a hearing aid, the only remaining question is who she is answering. The Swiss watch in the Ming tomb. In 2008, a documentary crew in Shaanxi County, Guangxi Province, China, was filming the excavation of a 400-year-old Ming Dynasty tomb that had been sealed for centuries. When a layer of sediment encasing a small coffin was removed, something fell and struck the stone floor with a sharp metallic ring. It was not a coin. It was a watch, shaped like a ring, with the word Swiss engraved on its case back. The tomb was believed to be undisturbed since the 1600s. Former Guangxi Museum curator Zhang Yanyu was present during the excavation and handled the object. The story was reported by the Guangzhou Daily in December 2008 and generated immediate international coverage because the implications of a Swiss-engraved timepiece inside a sealed Ming-era tomb were, on their face, impossible. Swiss watchmaking as an organized industry did not begin until the late 18th century. The designation Swiss, as a mark of manufacturing origin on a watch case, was not standardized or commonly used until well into the 19th century. The object recovered was a ring watch, a miniature watch face set into a ring band, a form that did not exist anywhere near the 1600s. The watch hands were frozen at 10 past 6. The tomb's sediment layer, documented before excavation, showed no signs of prior entry. The standard explanation is that the tomb had been secretly accessed by a modern visitor, a phenomenon sometimes called grave tourism, and that the watch was left behind accidentally or as a prank. It is a reasonable explanation. Grave robbing and unauthorized entry into ancient sites are documented problems across China. But the sediment layer over the coffin was recorded as intact before the documentary crew broke through it. If someone had entered before, they did it without disturbing the seal. The watch hands stopped at 10 past 6. That number means nothing historically, but it feels like a timestamp, a moment caught at the exact edge of explanation, frozen there, waiting for someone to ask the right question about how it arrived. The Brelorn Pioneer Museum photograph. Sometime around 1940, a photograph was taken at the reopening of a bridge in Brelorn, British Columbia, Canada. It shows a crowd dressed precisely as you would expect a crowd to dress in that era. Wool coats, newsboy caps, formal hats, dark fabric, no exceptions. Every person in the frame belongs to their decade, except one. The photograph is held in the Brelorne Pioneer Museum and became part of a virtual Museum of Canada exhibit around 2010. When it circulated online, researchers began focusing on a single figure near the back of the crowd. The figure wears what appears to be a screen-printed logo t-shirt, a style of casual garment that was not commercially produced until the 1960s. The sunglasses have thick, clearly defined plastic frames, and mass-produced plastic frame sunglasses did not enter the market until the 1950s. The camera the figure holds is small and compact, different in form from the large press cameras standard to that era. Individually, each element has an explanation. Screen printing existed before the 60s, though not on casual consumer clothing. Early Ray-Ban and Vournay predecessors produced frames that could resemble modern designs. The Argus A, a portable consumer camera, launched in 1936 and was genuinely compact for its time. Historians offer these explanations, and they are not wrong, but the combination is what resists dismissal. Three separate anachronisms, each explainable in isolation, converged on a single figure in a single authenticated photograph. The statistical argument alone is uncomfortable. Beyond the objects, there is something in the posture. Everyone in the crowd is watching the ceremony. The figure near the back is not. According to researchers who have studied the photograph, the figure appears to be looking directly at the camera, at the photographer, as if already aware of being observed. The photograph is real. The crowd is real. The anomaly is real. What remains unresolved is whether three simultaneous coincidences explain a single figure, or whether three simultaneous coincidences are exactly what one person from a different time would look like, standing in the wrong decade with no idea how conspicuous they are. The Crocodile Hunter Anomaly. Season 1 of The Crocodile Hunter aired on Australian television in 1996 before being syndicated globally through Animal Planet. The footage was shot in Queensland, Australia, in 1995. In a wide establishing shot from one of those early episodes, visible in the background for approximately 4 seconds, a figure moves through the frame holding a thin rectangular object horizontally at arm's length, pointed outward, in the posture of someone recording video on a smartphone. The first commercially available smartphone, the iPhone, was announced by Steve Jobs on January 9th, 2007, and went on sale in June of that year. The posture associated with smartphone video recording, holding a flat rectangular device horizontally away from the body at arm's length, is a behavioral convention that developed after 2007. It does not appear in 1995 footage because there was nothing to hold that way in 1995. The mainstream explanation reaches for the Casio QV10, released in 1995, the first consumer digital camera with a rear LCD screen, which was flat, rectangular, and could theoretically be held at arm's length. The device was approximately 2.2 inches wide. Researchers who have analyzed the background figure argue the object appears larger. The Sony Mavica floppy disk camera also existed, though it was significantly bulkier than what appears in the frame. But this item is not really about the object. It is about the behavior. The Casio QV10 existed, but nobody in 1995 held it the way a person holds a smartphone to film horizontally. That posture did not exist. It developed over years of muscle memory as smartphones became universal. The figure in the background is not just carrying an anachronistic object. They are using it in a way their era had no framework for. You can explain the device. Historians have managed that much. What no explanation has addressed is why someone in 1995 was filming like it was 2015. The object and the behavior belong to the same decade, and that decade is not the one visible in the rest of the frame. The Civil War hoodie photograph. Sometime between 1860 and 1865, a group portrait was taken during the American Civil War era. Civil War photography is among the most thoroughly cataloged in American archival history. Its conventions rigid and well documented. Military uniform, formal civilian dress, dark fabric, no exceptions. Every photograph from this period follows the same visual grammar. This one mostly does. Except for a single figure in the group wearing what fashion historians have identified as a hooded sweatshirt with a front zipper. The zipper, in its modern functional form, was not patented until 1913, when Gideon Sunbeck filed his design for the hookless fastener. It was not applied to casual clothing until the 1930s. The hoodie as a garment was popularized by Champion Sportswear in the same decade. The term hoodie was not in common use until the 1990s. The figure in this photograph appears to be wearing both simultaneously, roughly 70 years before either component was manufactured. Skeptics offer the standard reframe. A laced front jacket might resemble a zipper placket in low-resolution period photography, and a knit sweater with a ribbed collar could be mistaken for a hood. These are not unreasonable points. Photography of the 1860s was not high definition, and optical ambiguity is real. But the hood in this photograph is distinguishable as a separate attached piece, not a collar sitting flush against the neck. The two elements, the front fastening structure and the attached hood, are both present. For the skeptic explanation to hold, the photograph must simultaneously contain a laced jacket misread as a zipper and a collar misread as a hood on the same garment worn by the same person. The garment in this photograph has never been matched to any documented period clothing from the Civil War era. No equivalent piece appears in any Union or Confederate uniform catalog, no civilian wardrobe inventory, no period illustration. The figure's clothing has no origin in its own century. That absence is not proof of anything, but it is the kind of absence that refuses to stay quiet. The Rudolph Fentz Case. In 1950, a man reportedly appeared in Times Square, New York, wearing Victorian-era clothing, visibly disoriented, and was struck and killed by a car within moments of arrival. In his pockets, investigators allegedly found items consistent with the 1870s. A copper beer token dated 1876, business cards for a man named Rudolph Fentz, a bill from a livery stable for the care of a horse. His fingerprints matched no living person. No missing persons report matched his description. Here's what makes this case different from every other entry on this list. The story is fiction. It was written by Jack Finney and published in Collier's magazine in 1951 in a short story called I'm Scared. Finney invented Rudolph Fentz, invented the copper token, invented the livery bill, and invented Captain Hubert V. Ream, the NYPD officer who supposedly investigated the case. None of it happened, and yet by the 1970s, paranormal researchers were citing the Fentz case as documented fact. Frank Edwards included it in his 1959 book, Stranger Than Science, as a real event. German paranormal compendiums repeated it. Researchers cited the NYPD file, the coroner's report, the fingerprint records, none of which exist, because they had read secondary sources citing tertiary sources, with no one returning to the original Finney story. The fictional origin was only conclusively traced by researcher Chris Aubeck in the early 2000s. The story was so precisely grounded in real New York geography and period detail that it created its own paper trail. Each citation added apparent weight. The NYPD has never confirmed or denied a Captain Hubert Faith of Ream because there is no Captain Hubert Faith of Ream. The file does not exist because there was never a file. The most terrifying possibility here is not that Rudolph Fentz traveled through time. It is that his story proves how easily a piece of well-crafted fiction becomes documented history. The Fentz case is not evidence of time travel. It is evidence of something more unsettling, that the historical record is only as reliable as the people who decided to stop checking their sources. The 1928 corporate film. Sometime around 1928 to 1930, a corporate promotional film was produced in the United States to demonstrate future communication technology to investors and potential consumers. In one sequence, a woman is shown speaking into a small, handheld wireless device. The other person responds through a receiver she holds to her ear. The exchange is two-way, wireless, and personal. The film was made 60 years before the first commercial mobile phone call. Martin Cooper of Motorola made that first call on April 3, 1973, using the Dynatac prototype. The first commercially available mobile phone, the Motorola Dynatac 8000X, reached consumers in 1983. What the corporate film depicted was not a telephone, which already existed by 1928. It depicted a wireless two-way handheld communication device with no visible wire or connection point. That is a different technology entirely, and in 1928, it did not exist. The standard explanation is that science fiction tropes about wireless personal communication were already circulating in popular culture. Hugo Gernsback launched Amazing Stories magazine in 1926, and handheld communicators appeared regularly in its pages. Inventors and futurists were publicly speculating about wireless personal devices. The film, in this reading, was simply dramatizing what imaginative people were already predicting. But there is a meaningful difference between a writer imagining something and a corporation filming it as an expected near-future product demonstration for investors. Nikola Tesla had described a global wireless communication system as early as 1909 in interviews with the New York Times, a network capable of transmitting information to personal handheld receivers. Tesla's research files were seized by the United States government upon his death in 1943. What circulated in corporate and engineering circles in the 1920s may have drawn on knowledge that never entered the mainstream historical record. When a corporation produces a product demonstration for a device that will not be invented for 60 years, the question worth asking is not whether they imagined it. The question is where the image came from. The Andrew Carlson stock trading case. In January 2003, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission arrested a man named Andrew Carlson for insider trading. In 2 weeks, he had turned an initial investment of $800 into $350 million through 126 consecutive high-risk stock trades. Every single one was profitable. When questioned, Carlson told investigators he was a time traveler from the year 2256. He offered to reveal the location of Osama bin Laden and a cure for AIDS in exchange for leniency. The story was first reported by Weekly World News on March 19, 2003. Weekly World News was a publication known for satirical fiction. The case was invented. The SEC confirmed it had no record of any Andrew Carlson. But within weeks of publication, Yahoo News, the Toronto Star, and a BBC-affiliated outlet had all picked up the story and reported it as factual news coverage of a real SEC arrest. All three retracted or quietly removed their articles within days of the error being identified. The statistical argument embedded in the fiction is worth pausing on. The probability of correctly predicting 126 consecutive high-risk stock trades by chance alone is, by any reasonable financial mathematics framework, so remote as to be effectively impossible. Researchers have estimated the figure at something in the range of 1 in 10 to the 38th power. The story chose that number deliberately because it sits at the precise boundary where legitimate markets end and something else has to be true. The details Carlson offered, bin Laden's location and an AIDS cure, were chosen with structural precision. Both were claims whose verification would take time, long enough for the story to spread before anyone could confirm or deny them. That architecture, a claim deferred long enough to travel, is the exact blueprint of every successful large-scale hoax in recorded history. The story was fake. That is confirmed and documented. What is not comfortable to dismiss is the fact that the BBC reported it as real. The editorial infrastructure of one of the world's most trusted news organizations looked at a weekly world news story about a time traveler and published it as journalism. That failure does not prove anything about time travel. It proves something about how evidence is evaluated and how much institutional authority a convincing story can borrow before anyone checks the source. The Moberly-Jourdain Versailles incident. On August 10, 1901, two Oxford academics visited the Palace of Versailles as tourists. Charlotte Ann Moberly was the principal of St. Hugh's College, Oxford. Eleanor Jourdain was her vice principal. Both were credentialed scholars with no prior history of paranormal claims. While walking through the gardens of the Petit Trianon, they reported entering an atmosphere they described independently as flat and unreal. The people they encountered were dressed in 18th century clothing. One figure, they later claimed, matched contemporary portraits of Marie Antoinette. When they returned, the garden paths, the kiosk, and the bridge they had crossed no longer existed. They published their account in 1911 under the pseudonyms Miss Morrison and Miss Lamont in a book called An Adventure, which went through multiple editions. They identified the date of their apparent displacement as August 5th, 1789, 5 days before the women of Paris marched on Versailles. The architectural detail is where the account becomes genuinely difficult to dismiss. Architectural researcher Philippe Julien investigated the claims and confirmed that elements of the garden Moberly and Jourdain described, a specific kiosk, a bridge, and a particular pathway configuration, matched documented maps of the Versailles grounds from 1780 to 1789. Those features had been demolished before 1901. The women described them with accuracy they should not have been able to produce without access to historical plans they had never seen. The standard rebuttal offered by W. H. Salter of the Society for Psychical Research in 1950 was that they had accidentally encountered a costume party or theatrical rehearsal. No such event was documented at Versailles on August 10, 1901. Staff records from the period show no scheduled event of any kind. Moberly and Jourdain kept their notes separately and compared them afterward. Their descriptions of specific architectural features matched. Moberly reported that the figure she believed to be Marie Antoinette looked up at her with an expression of, in her words, misery. The date they identified, August 5th, 1789, was one of the most psychologically devastating days of Antoinette's life. If it was a hallucination, it was one of the most historically precise hallucinations ever recorded. Two credentialed women, independent notes, matching details verified against 18th century maps. At some point, the question becomes what standard of evidence would actually be sufficient? The Philadelphia experiment footage claim. In October 1943, the USS Eldridge, a United States Navy destroyer escort, allegedly disappeared from its berth at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, teleported 375 miles to Norfolk, Virginia, and reappeared in Philadelphia minutes later. Sailors reportedly went mad. Some were found partially embedded in the hull. Decades later, a man named Al Bielek claimed he had jumped from the ship during the experiment and landed in 1983. He produced footage he said documented the event. The footage was from a 1984 Hollywood science fiction film. The story originates with Carl M. Allen, also known as Carlos Allende, who in 1955 annotated a copy of Morris Jessup's book, The Case for the UFO, with handwritten notes claiming to have witnessed the teleportation from a nearby vessel. The USS Eldridge's official deck logs, obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, show the ship was not in Philadelphia on the dates in question. Its logs place it elsewhere. The Office of Naval Research released an official statement in 1996 confirming the experiment never occurred. Al Bielek, born Edward Cameron, claimed in the 1980s and 90s to have served on the Eldridge and to have time traveled to the years 2137 and 2749 before returning to 1983. He gave conference lectures with slides to audiences of thousands. The footage he presented as documentation was identified as B-roll from the Philadelphia experiment, directed by Stuart Raffle, a commercially released film available in any video rental store. One thing is confirmed and documented. Project Rainbow was real. United States Navy electromagnetic degaussing experiments, designed to make ships invisible to radar, were conducted in 1943. The gap between what was classified and what was claimed is precisely the kind of gap that allows a myth to breathe, because the government's denial of the myth requires also denying the classified kernel of real research inside it, and governments do not make clean denials. The footage was from a movie. The primary witness fabricated his own past. The Navy's records contradict every timeline. And 40 years after Allende's annotations, the story is larger than it has ever been. That persistence is not a failure of logic in the people who believe it. It is a demonstration of something the ancient world understood and we keep rediscovering. Some stories survive not on evidence, but on the size of the hole they fill. The Philadelphia experiment endures because it names something people already suspected, that official history is edited, that the record has gaps, and that what falls into those gaps does not always stay there. 10 cases, 10 moments where the record developed a crack. A woman talking into a device with no network. A watch with a word that didn't exist yet. A figure in a crowd wearing the wrong decade. A posture that hadn't been invented. A garment assembled from two components, neither of which existed. A story so well crafted it became a historical source. A corporate film demonstrating a product 60 years early. A financial impossibility reported as news by the BBC. 2 Oxford academics describing a garden that had been demolished. And a military experiment whose only footage came from a movie rental shelf. Each item has an explanation. Most of the explanations are even plausible. What the explanations share is that they all require you to stop asking the next question. History rewards the people who ask it anyway. If you've watched this far, you're already one of them. This channel exists for the people who notice the cracks. Subscribe, and come back every time something in the official record doesn't quite add up. The past keeps leaving evidence. Someone has to be here to find it.